Hey guys, tonight we're talking about a drug you might have already seen. Not the packet, the effect. Maybe you've walked through a city centre and noticed someone frozen mid-step, bent at an impossible angle, staring at nothing, not sleeping, not moving, just stopped, like someone hit pause on a human being and forgot to come back. Maybe you've seen 3 people like that on the same block. Maybe you've seen a video online that looks like a zombie apocalypse, except everyone's wearing normal clothes and it's Tuesday afternoon. That's spice. K2, synthetic cannabinoids. Whatever name your corner of the world gave to the chemical lottery that promised the high of marijuana and delivered something closer to a full system shutdown, it's not weed, it's not medicine, it's not even really a single thing. It's hundreds of different chemicals, cooked up in labs, sprayed on dead plants, and sold in shiny packets with cartoon mascots. A photocopy of a feeling, sold to people who didn't have better options. Tonight we're talking about how fake weed became very real misery, and how a drug that wasn't supposed to exist ended up owning a generation of people who never really had a chance to say no. But before we get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're lying right now, perhaps tucked under a blanket halfway between curiosity and sleep. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Here's what nobody tells you about being homeless in America. The worst part isn't the cold. It's not the hunger, it's the slow realization that you've stopped being a person to everyone around you. You wake up on concrete. Your back hurts. It always hurts now. You stand up and people walk past like you're part of the sidewalk. Their eyes go somewhere else. Anywhere else. Mothers pull their children closer as they pass, not because you're dangerous, but because poverty might be contagious and they're not taking chances. Businessmen suddenly discover their phones contain the most fascinating information in human history, right at the exact moment they'd otherwise have to acknowledge your existence. You've become so invisible that sometimes you check your own hands just to confirm you're still here. 14 hours until you can lie down again. 14 hours of nothing, nowhere to go, nothing to do, just existing in a world that wishes you'd do it somewhere else. And the whole time, you carry this weight, not the backpack. The other one, the one that sits on your chest and reminds you, you used to be someone. You had a name, a job, an address that wasn't under the overpass. Somewhere along the way, the floor opened up, you fell through, and nobody caught you. Some people drink to quiet that voice. Some people shoot up. Some people just wait. And then someone offers you something new. $2. A few hours of not being you anymore. The corner store sells it behind the counter. Shiny package. Cartoon character on the front because nothing says responsible drug use like a mascot that looks like it escaped from a cereal box. Names like Scooby Snacks or Cloud9 or Mr. Happy. The branding department really went all in on plausible deniability. The label says it's incense. Potpourri. Not for human consumption. Everyone knows what it's actually for. The warning isn't a warning. It's a legal fig leaf. The lawyers are happy. The guy behind the counter says it's like weed. But legal. And it won't show up on drug tests. That last part is everything. The shelter tests you. The treatment program tests you. Every rung on the ladder back to normal life has someone holding a plastic cup, waiting to see if you deserve another chance. One positive and you're out. Back on the concrete. Real weed stays in your system for weeks. This stuff, gone in hours, $2, that's all it costs. Tonight you don't have a bed. Tonight the weight is crushing you. $2 to make it stop. You buy it. You smoke it. And here's the thing about synthetic cannabinoids. They don't get you high, they delete you. Let's talk about what actual marijuana does because the comparison matters. Real weed is like a warm bath for your brain. You sink in, you relax, your thoughts get softer. Maybe you become convinced your cat is judging you. Maybe you develop urgent opinions about whether fish get thirsty. You're still you, just slower, hungrier, more likely to get emotionally invested in a documentary about mushrooms. Humans have been smoking it for thousands of years. The worst case scenario is eating an entire pizza alone and waking up confused about what happened to the pizza. Predictable, manageable. The pharmaceutical equivalent of a Toyota Camry. Synthetic cannabinoids are not the Toyota Camry. Synthetic cannabinoids are what happens when someone straps a rocket engine to a shopping cart and removes the brakes. When you smoke real weed, THC knocks politely on your brain's receptors, waits to be let in, leaves when it's supposed to. These chemicals don't knock, they kick. Down the door, set fire to the furniture, and refuse to leave until your neurons file a restraining order. They bind to those same receptors 50 times harder than THC, some versions 100 times harder. Your brain expects a gentle visitor, gets a home invasion. That first hit feels okay, floaty. You think everyone was worried about nothing. Give it a minute. That weight on your chest, gone. Not lighter, gone. Like someone reached inside you and pulled it out with both hands. For the first time in months, maybe years, you're not carrying anything. The anxiety that lives in your shoulders, vanished. The voice in your head that never shuts up, the one reminding you of everything you lost, everything you failed, everyone who gave up on you, finally goes quiet. The room starts breathing, not metaphorically. The walls expand and contract like lungs. Time becomes unreliable. A minute might last an hour might vanish in what feels like seconds. Your thoughts start looping, circling back on themselves like a dog chasing its tail into infinity. Your body starts feeling like it belongs to someone else, someone who isn't answering calls right now. Your legs are still there, probably, but the connection between want to move and actually moving has become theoretical. Walking would require solving a physics problem you're no longer capable of understanding. Colours get weird, sounds get weird. That car alarm 3 blocks away might be the most important thing you've ever heard, or it might not exist at all, hard to say. And then you leave, not physically, your body stays exactly where it is. Sitting on that bench, standing on that corner, crumpled in that doorway. But you, the part of you that thinks and feels and knows your own name, you go somewhere else, somewhere that isn't here, somewhere that might not be anywhere. Users call this gouging out. Your consciousness gets scooped out like ice cream. What's left is a shell, a human-shaped object that can't move, can't speak, can't respond, just exists, frozen, staring at nothing with eyes that see nothing. You might stay like that for minutes, hours, long enough for people to walk past thinking you're a statue, long enough for someone to call 911, long enough for the paramedics to arrive, assess the situation, realize there's nothing they can really do, and wait beside you for whatever chemical roulette you played to stop spinning. Long enough for strangers to film you and post it online with zombie emojis and comments about how the city should do something. That's the high. That's what $2 buys. And here's the thing nobody tells you. When you're homeless, when that weight is crushing you every single day, when you just want a few hours of not existing, complete ego death sounds less like a side effect and more like the whole point. You don't want to feel better. You want to stop feeling entirely. And this drug offers exactly that. A temporary death you can buy for pocket change. Then it ends. You come back. Slowly. Like waking up from surgery, except nobody told you what the surgery was for and the hospital is a park bench. Hours have passed. The sun moved. Shadows changed. Time happened while you were away and left no notes. Your mouth feels like something died in it and then dried out. Your head hurts in a way that's hard to describe. Not throbbing, not sharp, just wrong. Like your brain got put back slightly off centre. Something's not right. Something might never be right again. And that weight, the one that disappeared for a few beautiful hours, it's back. Heavier than before, like it charged interest while you were gone. Like absence was a loan, and now payment's due with fees. So you buy another packet. Because $2 is still cheaper than existing, and existing just got harder. This is the trap. Not addiction like heroin. Your body won't go into withdrawal, won't shake and sweat and scream, but something happens that might be worse. You discover a door. Behind the door is a place where you don't have to be you anymore. The door costs $2 and it's right there at the corner store between the energy drinks and the lottery tickets. Waiting. Available. Anytime the weight gets too heavy. Once you know that door exists, everything changes. Every bad moment, every crushing hour, every time life reminds you of everything you've lost, you know there's an exit. Temporary, damaging. But right there, the packets pile up, the doses get bigger. What used to delete you for hours barely works anymore, so you smoke more. Different brands, stronger batches. Here's what you don't know. The chemicals keep changing. Every time the government bans one formula, manufacturers switch to another. Last month's packet and this month's packet look identical. Same shiny wrapper, same cartoon character grinning at you, but inside could be completely different chemicals. Untested, unknown, cooked up in a lab somewhere, by someone who doesn't know or care what it does to human brains. You're not even playing Russian roulette. That at least has known odds. You're playing Russian roulette with a gun that might have 1 bullet or 6 or none or 12. The rules change every time you pull the trigger. Some batches hit harder, some don't hit at all, some do things nobody expected. Some people don't come back right. Not dead, just different. The body returns, but something inside stays gone. Memory that doesn't rebuild. Personality that doesn't return. Cognitive function that got burned out like a fuse that blew. Except brains don't have replacement parts. The $2 exit has a price. You just don't know what it is until the bill arrives, which raises the question, where did this come from? Because fake weed doesn't grow in fake fields. Someone had to invent this. Someone had to figure out the chemistry, and someone else had to figure out how to sell it. The chemistry part starts with a man who never meant for any of this to happen. John William Huffman, chemistry professor at Clemson University. 62 years old when this story begins. Eyebrows like 2 caterpillars having a territorial dispute. Wire-rimmed glasses. 2 small dogs. Collected model trains. The obsessive kind where grown men glue tiny leaves to tiny trees and feel accomplished about it. If Hollywood needed to cast accidental drug lord, they would not call this man. Huffman looked like he'd help you file your taxes and enjoy it. He just wanted to understand how brains work. The universe had other plans. The government gave him a grant in 1984. Mission: create chemicals that help scientists study how marijuana affects the brain. Simple enough. What could go wrong? See, researchers had just discovered something weird. Human brains have cannabinoid receptors, tiny docking stations designed to receive cannabis compounds. Nobody knew why evolution installed these. It was like finding a USB port on a tree. Clearly, it connects to something. But what? Huffman's job was to make keys that fit those locks. Not drugs, tools. The kind of thing you give to rats, measure what happens, write a paper nobody reads, present at a conference where everyone's just there for the free coffee. He was good at his job. Over 20 years he created hundreds of different synthetic cannabinoids, each one named with his initials, J, W, H, followed by a number, hundreds of keys, published in journals with titles so boring they could cure insomnia, read by approximately 12 people worldwide. Compound 18 would make him famous, the bad kind. Compound 18 was synthesized in 1995, undergraduate student. Routine work. Nothing special about the day. Except this key worked really, really well. Disturbingly well. It bound to brain receptors 5 times harder than THC. Later versions would be stronger. 50 times, 80, 100. Huffman published the formula in 1998. Complete structure, synthesis pathway, everything you'd need to make it yourself. Because that's how science works. You share findings. You don't hide formulas. For 10 years, nothing happened. The formula sat in academic journals gathering dust. Nobody smoked it. Why would they? Who browses chemistry papers looking for a good time? Someone does. Someone always does. Somewhere in Europe, probably around 2004, someone had an idea. Nobody knows exactly who. The people who invented this business model weren't filing patents or writing press releases. They were too busy becoming very, very rich. But somebody, a chemist, an entrepreneur, a drug dealer with a creative lawyer, looked at Huffman's published formulas and realized something brilliant. These chemicals were legal to make, legal to sell. The only thing that was illegal was calling them drugs. So don't call them drugs, call them incense, herbal blends, potpourri. Add a label, not for human consumption. Now you're not selling drugs, you're selling a product that people happen to be misusing. Not your problem. The warning does all the work. The lawyers were comfortable. The first product was called Spice Gold, launched around 2004, probably in Germany, sold in head shops, little foil packets, fancy names, pretty packaging. The herbs inside were decoration, random plant material, sometimes literal lawn clippings, dried flowers from someone's yard. It didn't matter what the plant was because the plant wasn't the point. The active ingredient was synthetic cannabinoids, Huffman's compounds dissolved in acetone, sprayed onto the dried leaves like you're coating vegetables with cooking spray. Let it dry, package it, sell it. It was genius in its simplicity. Take a legal chemical, put it on a legal plant, call it a legal product, add a legal warning. Every step is legal. The only illegal part is what the customer does after they buy it, and that's their problem. Within 2 years, spice was everywhere in Europe. Head shops, gas stations, online, stores. Nobody could stop it because technically nothing illegal was happening. The product was exactly what it claimed to be. Herbal incense that you shouldn't consume. The fact that everyone was consuming it wasn't the seller's fault. They'd warned you not to. By 2008, someone in America noticed. Actually, several someones noticed. Because this wasn't just a clever loophole. This was a gold mine. The formula crossed the Atlantic fast. American entrepreneurs saw what was happening in Europe and realized they'd been missing out. The pitch was simple. Buy chemicals from China. They make them by the ton. Legal export. Ship internationally. Customer service in English. Spray them on any dried plant material you want. Buy it in bulk from herb suppliers or literally rake up leaves. Package it in shiny foil with a cartoon mascot and a warning label. Sell it in head shops, gas stations, corner stores. The margins were obscene. Chemicals cost pennies per dose. The packaging cost more than the product. And people would come back daily because the stuff worked. Better than that, it worked for people who couldn't use real marijuana. Soldiers, probationers, parolees, anyone whose freedom or career depended on passing drug tests. Real weed stays in your system for weeks. This stuff, gone in hours. Smoke it Tuesday, pass a test Wednesday. The market wasn't just homeless people desperate for escape, it was college kids, military personnel, people on probation, anyone who wanted a legal high that wouldn't show up in a cup. Spice Gold appeared in American head shops in 2008, then K2, then Cloud9, then 50 other brands, each one a different name for the same basic business model. Head shops that used to make modest money selling bongs and rolling papers suddenly found themselves moving hundreds of packets a day. The turnover was insane. Customers would come back multiple times in one day. Some stores became unofficial dispensaries for legal synthetic drugs. Store owners developed their rationalizations. We're just selling incense. We warn people not to consume it. What they do with it isn't our business. Everyone's hands were clean. The system was self-replicating. Chinese labs made the chemicals. American distributors bought them in bulk. Middlemen sprayed them on herbs. Retailers sold them to anyone with cash. Nobody was technically breaking any laws until the customer smoked it. And the customer was the only person in the entire supply chain who could be arrested. December 2008. Huffman checked his email. A German blogger had written to tell him his compound had been found in something called spice, sold openly in head shops across Europe. Labelled herbal incense. Warning, not for human consumption. Everyone was smoking it. The warning was working exactly as intended, as legal armour, not consumer protection. German labs had analysed the stuff. The herbs were decoration. Random plant material, sometimes literal lawn clippings. The actual ingredient was Huffman's compound, dissolved in acetone, sprayed onto the leaves. Someone had read his paper and thought, this would be great on dried oregano. Huffman wasn't surprised. Somebody was going to figure out how to make money from this, he said later. I'm surprised it took as long as it did. 10 years of peace. Then the exploitation arrived, and it spread fast. By 2009, synthetic cannabinoids were everywhere in America. Gas stations, corner stores, online, anyone could buy them. No ID required, and one group discovered it was perfect for their specific nightmare, the United States military. Here's the problem if you're in the military and you want to get high. You can't, not because of morality or discipline or respect for the uniform. You can't because approximately once a month someone hands you a plastic cup and watches you fill it. Random drug testing. The military's favourite hobby after marching and acronyms. Marijuana stays in your system for 30 days. Cocaine, maybe a week. Opiates, a few days. The military tests for all of them. Fail once, you're facing disciplinary action. Fail twice, you're probably getting discharged. Your entire future measured in urine. The American dream distilled into a plastic cup with a temperature strip. Synthetic cannabinoids didn't show up on these tests. The military was looking for THC metabolites. These weren't THC. These were entirely different molecules doing an extremely convincing impression of THC, like a tribute band that sounds nothing like the original, but somehow gets the same crowd response. It was a loophole you could drive an aircraft carrier through. Word spread the way forbidden knowledge always spreads in enclosed communities. Barracks to barracks, base to base. Online forums where service members shared information they definitely shouldn't have been sharing on government computers. Spice is clean. K2 won't pop hot. The modern military's version of passing notes in class, except the notes contained instructions for chemical consciousness deletion. By 2010, it was epidemic. It spread through the bases like barracks gossip. Fort Bliss in Texas, Camp Pendleton in California, Lewis McCord in Washington, 29 Palms. Anywhere young people in uniform lived, someone was selling packets of chemistry in shiny foil with cartoon characters on them. By some estimates, 1 in 5 junior enlisted were using it. 20%. The people trained to operate fighter jets and nuclear submarines were buying brain-scrambling chemicals at shops that also sold lava lamps and Bob Marley posters. The packets were sold at shops right outside the base gates. Strategic positioning. Some shops were closer to the bases than the actual military store, more convenient. Better selection. The free market at work. Meeting demand the government couldn't acknowledge existed. Sailors would smoke it on shore leave. Soldiers on weekend passes. Marines in the barracks, because of this, didn't smell like marijuana. It smelled like burning incense, which was literally what the package said it was. plausible deniability in vapour form. Even if someone walked in mid-smoke, you were just enjoying the aromatic properties of tropical breeze. Very relaxing, good for the sinuses probably. The appeal was obliteration. These were people returning from Iraq and Afghanistan with stress and trauma and memories they couldn't process and nowhere to put any of it. The military offers many things. Therapy waitlists are long. Packets that delete consciousness for a few hours were cheap and available immediately. The market solved the problem the VA couldn't. The fact that it was legal made it feel safe. Logic was simple. Dangerous things are illegal. Illegal things are dangerous. This was legal, therefore safe. The reasoning was airtight, like a submarine, which these people were trained to operate, after smoking things that made them freeze like lawn ornaments. The incidents started in late 2009. Seizures in the barracks, psychotic breaks during training exercises, heart attacks in 22-year-olds during morning PT. Young, healthy service members would just stop mid-run, collapse, start screaming about demons that only they could see, convulse on the floor like someone had unplugged them from reality, and the system was trying to reboot. The paramedics would arrive, standard procedure, transport them. By the time they reached the hospital, many had stopped seizing. They'd wake up confused, insisting they'd only smoked incense, herbal, for aroma. The doctors were not convinced. The doctors would run every test available to modern medicine: blood work, brain scans, toxicology screens that cost more than the average monthly rent. Everything would come back negative, clean, pristine, as if nothing had happened. The doctors would look at the results, look at the patient who had been screaming about demons 10 minutes ago, look back at the results and experience the unique frustration of being certain something happened while having zero evidence it happened. These weren't isolated incidents. They were weekly, then daily. The pattern was obvious. The cause was invisible. The solution was non-existent. Commanders started getting nervous. You can't deploy troops who might seize randomly during combat operations. You can't have people screaming about demons during live-fire exercises. The demons might be real, but probably weren't, and either way this was a problem. But you also can't order people to stop using something that's legal to buy at stores and doesn't register on any test the military possesses. The legal limbo was perfect and infuriating. You can't punish me for something that's legal, sir. Technically true, infuriatingly true. The kind of technically true that makes commanders want to throw regulations out windows. The military branches tried to fight back the way military branches always fight back, with policies, stern ones. The Navy banned it first in June 2009, then the Army, then the Air Force, then the Marines, then the Coast Guard. Each branch issued official memorandums prohibiting possession or use of synthetic marijuana products. The memos were printed on official letterhead. Very serious, very official, very unenforceable. The problem was simple. You couldn't prove someone had used it. The branches tried different approaches, ban specific brand names, ban products substantially similar to synthetic cannabinoids. The banned brand names were out of date before the memos were printed. The compounds were changing faster than military bureaucracy could type. Banning Spice Gold when everyone was smoking Black Mamba was like banning cassette tapes to stop music piracy. Meanwhile, store owners outside military bases were making extraordinary money. 6 figures a month from shops that looked like they'd been decorated by people who'd never met a black light they didn't like. The military would issue a ban, sales would dip for 1 week, then bounce back. The bans were theatre. The owners had their script memorised. We just sell incense. What people do with it isn't our responsibility. We have the warning label right there. The lawyers were comfortable. The money was excellent. The customers kept coming. By mid-2010, Congress was getting letters. Commanders, parents, service members who'd watched friends seize or die. The military wanted help. They'd tried internal bans, they'd tried stern policies. They'd tried really stern policies with extra official language. Nothing worked because the root problem was federal. These chemicals were legal to manufacture, legal to sell, and legal to buy. The only illegal part was the smoking, and you couldn't prove the smoking. The Department of Defense couldn't ban something the federal government said was legal to sell. It was like trying to enforce prohibition while the government still allowed liquor stores to operate next to every speakeasy. The absurdity was structural. Young men and women trained to follow orders, trusted with classified information and expensive weapons, deployed to active war zones, were buying brain-scrambling chemicals at shops outside their bases because the government hadn't figured out how to ban them without banning chemistry itself. And then, in June 2010, in a small town in Iowa, an 18-year-old named David Rosger bought K2 at a mall. 90 minutes later, he was dead. You'd think one death changes nothing in drug policy, and you'd be right mostly. One death in the drug war is like one raindrop in a hurricane. But this one did something, partly because he bought K2 at a mall kiosk, not a head shop, not a sketchy dealer, a mall between Orange Julius and Spencer's Gifts. Same retail ecosystem as Cinnabon and phone cases. Legal purchase, no ID required. The cashier probably asked if he wanted to sign up for the rewards program. Buy 9 packets of consciousness deletion, get the 10th free. The system had been designed with remarkable precision. Like a Rube Goldberg machine where every component functions perfectly, and the final outcome is a dead kid. 90 minutes from purchase to death. Less time than most people spend at Target. The mall was still open, the kiosk still had inventory, the rewards program was still accepting new members. When something like this happens, most parents implode. Grief collapses inward like a dying star. Natural, predictable. The expected human response to unbearable loss. Mike Rosger did something different. He got angry at a specific target. Not his son, not kids these days. Not drugs in general or society's moral decline, or the internet or video games or any of the usual abstractions people blame when they need somewhere to put rage but don't want to do paperwork. He got angry at the legal architecture. The specific fact that someone had sold brain-scrambling chemistry at a mall kiosk and every person in the supply chain, Chinese lab, American, importer, regional distributor, store owner, cashier, had kept their hands surgically clean with 4 magic words. Not for human consumption. The warning label functioned like a legal airbag, designed to protect the manufacturer during the crash, not prevent the crash from happening. Everyone survived the transaction except the customer. Mike decided someone with a vote should probably address this, so he went to Congress, the actual building with the dome, where laws get made by people who've never bought drugs at a mall because they were teenagers before malls existed. Not once, repeatedly, testified at hearings, told his son's story to rooms full of senators who nodded sympathetically while their staffers Googled synthetic cannabinoids under the table, became the designated grieving father, the human prop, the reason they called the press conference. A job that doesn't exist until someone's kid dies in a way that generates headlines. And here's the remarkable part. It worked. Sort of. In the way that treating a symptom technically counts as addressing the disease. In the way that putting a band-aid on a bullet wound makes it to the medical textbooks as intervention occurred. Iowa moved first. Banned K2 completely. 1 month after David died. 1 month. That's faster than most people get their driver's license renewed. Someone's intern definitely pulled an all-nighter. Probably got pizza, maybe a certificate. Democracy working at unprecedented velocity. Then the feds stepped in, November 2010. The DEA used emergency powers, the kind usually reserved for preventing immediate catastrophic harm, like anthrax or nuclear material, to ban 5 synthetic cannabinoids, 5 specific molecular structures, out of hundreds. The chemists had built a language with infinite words, and the government had just banned 5 of them. Shop owners across America received the news, looked at their inventory, picked up the phone. Hey, got anything else? Yeah, hundreds of things. Because here's what nobody in Congress understood. Banning specific molecules is like banning specific words. The language doesn't care. Just rearrange the letters. Same meaning, different spelling, legal again. The Chinese manufacturers, actual chemists, people with degrees and equipment and a functional understanding of organic chemistry, had been monitoring government announcements the way day traders watch the stock market. Government bans Compound A at 9 in the morning. The lab ships Compound B by noon. Same effect. Different molecular arrangement. Perfectly legal. This is a tortoise and hare situation, except the hare has a chemistry degree, and the tortoise is the federal government wearing ankle weights. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, John Huffman was learning what it's like to be famous for something you never meant to create. Remember Huffman? Chemistry professor, model trains, wanted to understand brains, not destroy them, published his formulas, because that's what scientists do. By 2010, his name was everywhere, not in academic journals, in news articles. Huffman's compounds found in synthetic drugs. Kills teenager. Professor's research fuels deadly epidemic. The hate mail started arriving in 2010. Kept arriving through 2012. Some of it was heartbroken, some was threatening. All of it blamed him. Parents who'd lost kids wanted to know why he'd created this. Military families wanted to know if he understood what he'd done. Activists wanted him prosecuted. Some people just wanted him dead. Huffman tried explaining. He didn't create drugs. He created research tools. The exploitation wasn't his fault. He published openly because that's how science works. How was he supposed to know someone would spray his compounds on lawn clippings and sell them at gas stations? The explanation didn't help. People needed someone to blame. A dead kid needs a villain. Huffman was the closest thing available. The death threats got specific. Not vague. Someone should do something messages, detailed ones. Descriptions of what would happen to him. How, when, where. He stopped going to his office alone, started checking his car before getting in. The university assigned security for a chemistry professor who studied plants. The worst part wasn't the threats. It was the knowledge that he couldn't undo any of it. You can't unpublish research. Once the formulas are out, they're out forever. The internet doesn't forget. Even if he'd wanted to hide his work, it was too late. The compounds existed. The manufacturers had the recipes. The damage was done. By 2012, the mainstream market was dying. Not because the bans worked, because the product got too hot, too much attention, too many dead kids. The casual users, college kids, curious experimenters, people who thought it was basically legal weed, they moved on. The manufacturers responded the way markets always respond, with a sale. The packets used to cost $25, then $10, then $5, then $2, less than a cup of coffee. The kind of price that stops being a decision and starts being why not. The chemistry got worse too. Cheaper chemicals meant better margins. The newer compounds weren't Huffman's carefully researched creations. They were variations made by chemists trying to stay ahead of bans while cutting costs. Stronger, weirder, more unpredictable. The high became less like marijuana and more like playing chicken with a seizure. But it was cheap, and it was legal, and it was available. The packets disappeared from nice neighborhoods and reappeared in poor ones. Corner stores, bodegas, places where nobody was watching. People who needed cheap, People who take any exit door available, people for whom might cause a seizure was a risk worth taking if it meant a few hours of not being themselves. The homeless. For someone experiencing homelessness, the appeal was obvious. You didn't want to feel better. You wanted to stop feeling. This was the most efficient way to stop feeling that $2 could buy. That frozen dissociative consciousness deletion state that terrified everyone else. That was the selling point. Complete ego death wasn't a side effect. It was the whole point. When your current life is sleeping on concrete and being invisible to everyone who sees you, long-term brain damage becomes a theoretical problem. The long-term doesn't matter when the short-term is crushing you. By 2015, spice became the drug of homelessness in America. Some cities were hit harder than others. New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, Philadelphia, Austin. Places with large homeless populations and cheap packets available on every corner. Social workers started noticing. Something had changed. Clients were showing up to services frozen, unresponsive, eyes open but nobody home. They'd be fine one day, zombified the next, fine again after that. The pattern was new. This had been happening for months. Someone would smoke, stop moving, stand there frozen for 20 minutes like a human statue auditioning for street performance work. Except street performers do it on purpose and get paid. These people just stopped. What changed early that year wasn't the freezing. It was the scale. In Brooklyn, a dealer on Myrtle Avenue gets a shipment of a new compound. Stronger than the last batch. Chemistry had improved, if you want to call it that. He sells it to his regulars. They smoke it. Within an hour, they start dropping. Not one or two, dozens, mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-existence. Bodies upright, eyes open, software crashed, hardware still running. Someone calls 911, then someone else, then someone else. The dispatcher starts getting the same call from different phones about different intersections with the same impossible description. By mid-morning, paramedics are arriving at scenes that look like someone pressed pause on reality. Ambulances double-parked like delivery trucks, people frozen in various poses, modern art. Nobody commissioned it. Dozens of people throughout the day, all homeless, all from the same batch, all still breathing, just not present for it. The paramedics wait. Eventually people blink, wake up confused, ask what happened. Nobody can tell them because consciousness doesn't leave forwarding information. They walk away, the ambulances leave. 3 days later, the same dealer is back on the same corner. Different name on the packet, same price, same outcome probably. The market continued. This should have been the wake-up call. It wasn't. Because America is very good at sleeping through alarms. A month later, it happened again. Bigger this time. As if the universe was testing how large a crisis needed to be before someone did something. New Haven has a park in the centre of the city. They call it the Green. 16 acres. 3 churches face it. Trinity on the west, Centre Church on the north, United Church on the east. Historic. Beautiful. The kind of place you bring visitors to show them how charming your city is. Also the kind of place homeless people sleep because shelter beds are fictional and the numbers needed. And a visible park is safer than an invisible alley. Someone sells a batch near the Green that morning. By afternoon, people start collapsing. Not gradually, fast. Like someone had released a gas that only affected people without homes, which in a sense someone had. Dozens of people overdose on the New Haven Green, in front of the churches, in front of tourists photographing the historic architecture, in front of the lunch crowd from restaurants on Chapel Street, in front of everyone. Every ambulance in New Haven responds. Still not enough. Yale New Haven Hospital stops accepting new patients, which is hospital language for we're full of frozen people and have run out of places to put them. The emergency room fills with bodies in various positions of suspended animation. Some sitting, some standing. some bent in ways that looked uncomfortable but apparently weren't because they stayed that way. News helicopters circle, get excellent footage, very dramatic, great for the 6 o'clock news. The mayor holds a press conference, calls it a crisis, promises action, the usual script, well-meaning, ineffective. But someone had to say words into microphones while cameras recorded them for the historical record of things that were said but not done. This is when the rest of the country notices, not because synthetic cannabinoids were new, they'd been around for years, but because dozens of people frozen on a green lawn makes for compelling television. Tragedy becomes news when it happens in places cameras can reach. The video started immediately, because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's turning other people's suffering into content. Someone in Brooklyn films 3 people frozen on the same block, posts it to Twitter, 50,000 views in 24 hours. The algorithm approves, recommends it to more people. The number climbs. Someone in Los Angeles films a man standing perfectly still for 20 minutes while people walk around him like he's a parking meter. Instagram, 200,000 views. Comments full of concern and curiosity and laughing emojis. Humans are versatile in their responses to tragedy. More videos appear. Different cities, same symptoms. People frozen mid-step, bent at angles that defy physics. Eyes open, nobody home. The comments multiply like bacteria. What drug is this? Zombie apocalypse. This is what Democrats want. This is what Republicans caused. Everyone finds a way to make it about their pre-existing beliefs. Tragedy as confirmation bias. Nobody in the videos helps. Everyone films. The people being filmed can't consent because they're unconscious. This troubles exactly nobody. Consent is for people who can object. These people were busy being elsewhere. The media notices. Local news segments. Synthetic marijuana turning users into zombies. B-roll of frozen people looking very zombie-like if zombies were extremely still and didn't eat brains. But zombie tested well with focus groups. The phrase spreads faster than the drug itself. Zombie drug. Catchy. Inaccurate. Perfect for headlines. By that fall, synthetic cannabinoids had transformed from an invisible problem affecting an invisible population into content. Views, shares, engagement. The modern form of visibility. Not help, not solutions, just watching. Humans are excellent at watching. The spectacle was complete. And once something becomes a spectacle, governments have to at least look like they're doing something about it. The cities began holding meetings. This is what governments do when confronted with problems they don't know how to solve. They convene. Fluorescent lighting is involved. Coffee is consumed. Very serious discussions happen about very serious matters. New York's City Council held hearings. Doctors testified about seizures and brain damage. Paramedics testified about picking up the same people 5 times a week, which is essentially a subscription service for emergency medicine. Families testified about losing people to something sold legally next to chewing gum. The council listened and took notes and passed laws the way councils do. They called it Local Law 101, a ban on synthetic cannabinoids, with penalties for stores caught selling them. The NYPD raided 90 stores in the first month, seized thousands of packets, held press conferences with tables covered in colourful packages, cartoon mascots grinning at cameras. The irony was lost on no one, which didn't stop it from being ironic. The next week, different stores had the same products with different names. The mascots had changed costumes. The warnings were still there. The lawyers remained comfortable. The city tried again, expanded the definition. Any substance substantially similar to synthetic cannabinoids. This was meant to close the loophole. It assumed manufacturers weren't paying attention to legislative language. They were. Change one molecule, new compound, technically different, still legal, still $2. Chemistry moves at the speed of thought. Legislation moves at the speed of bureaucracy. This is not a fair race. Los Angeles tried a different approach. Criminalize possession, arrest the users. The users were homeless. They got arrested, released, and went back. Where else would they go? Chicago tried public health campaigns. K2 can kill. Billboards, bus ads, radio spots. 6 months, $400,000. Impact difficult to measure because people kept freezing at roughly the same rate. Turns out telling people, don't do the thing that makes existing bearable is not persuasive messaging. Every city tried something. Every approach failed for the same reason. They were banning specific chemicals. The manufacturers had hundreds. The legal loophole wasn't new. History keeps teaching this lesson. Nobody learns it. A century earlier, America didn't have drug laws. You could walk into any pharmacy and purchase morphine, cocaine, heroin. No prescription, no questions, no suspicious looks. They were medicines, perfectly legal, sold in bottles with labels promising cures for headaches, sadness, and the general burden of being alive. Sound familiar? Patent medicines flooded the market. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup promised to calm teething babies, and it did. The main ingredient was morphine, which made babies sleep beautifully while parents marvelled at modern science. Coca-Cola treated exhaustion with its original formula of actual cocaine, which was extremely refreshing and very effective. Bayer heroin for coughs came with an honest name at least, all perfectly legal, all sold openly. Just like packets with cartoon mascots at corner stores in 2016. Nobody called it a crisis, they called it medicine. Doctors recommended these products, pharmacists sold them, families bought them. Everyone was helping, just like store owners in Brooklyn selling incense were helping. Everyone's hands were clean. The addiction epidemic happened anyway. By the early 1900s, hundreds of thousands of Americans were addicted to opiates. Most had no idea. They'd been taking medicine for years. The medicine worked. It also created dependency. When they tried to stop, their bodies filed complaints. The government eventually noticed, eventually being the key word. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 required labels to list ingredients, which sounds obvious now but was revolutionary then. The Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914 regulated opiates and cocaine. They closed the legal loophole. The gap between technically legal and actually safe had claimed a generation, but they closed it. Here's the difference. In 1906, the manufacturers were in America. You could raid their factories, arrest the owners, shut down production at the source. The addicts were middle-class housewives and respectable citizens with addresses and voting rights. Worth the political effort. In 2016, the labs were in China, beyond the reach of American law enforcement. The addicts were homeless people on sidewalks. No addresses, no votes, no political pressure. Same legal gap, same pattern, very different political will to close it. So the laws changed, but the outcomes didn't. The people kept freezing. Months passed. The pattern became routine. Which is the saddest word in the English language when applied to human tragedy. Routine. The corners had their dealers. The stores had their inventory. The users had their spots. The paramedics had their regulars. Marcus, Jennifer, Tommy. Names that appeared in incident reports 3 times a week, not strangers. Known quantities. The paramedics knew their birthdays, had picked them up on those birthdays. Twice, in Tommy's case. Same cycle every time. Transport to hospital. Wait. Wake up. Release. 6 hours later, same person, same corner, same symptoms. The medical system had become a revolving door. Very efficient. Completely pointless. There's no medical code for chronic synthetic cannabinoid syndrome. There's no treatment protocol, no insurance billing category. The system wasn't designed for this. So the paramedics improvised, showed up, checked vitals, waited, transported, documented, repeated. Some carried Narcan just in case it was fentanyl pretending to be spice. Some carried glucose in case it was diabetic shock. Most just carried patients and the certainty that this would never end. The emergency rooms developed their own routine. Someone arrives frozen, catatonic, eyes open, vitals normal, tests are run, blood work, urine screens, CT scans if someone's feeling thorough. The tests reveal nothing. The chemicals change too fast to test for. By the time labs develop a test for one compound, 3 new ones are on the streets. Science moves fast. Chemistry moves faster. So they wait. Usually the person wakes up in 30 minutes. Confused. Disoriented. Trying to leave immediately because hospitals are expensive and nobody has insurance. The staff asks questions. Do you know where you are? Do you know what happened? Do you need help? The answers are always the same. Sort of. No. No. They're discharged. 6 hours later, they're back. Same symptoms. Same outcome. Except when they don't wake up normal. Except when they wake up seizing. Status epilepticus. Medical terminology for your brain is misfiring continuously and we're running out of ideas. The standard treatment is benzodiazepines, Valium, Ativan. Give them. Wait for the seizure to stop. With synthetic cannabinoids, the seizures often don't stop. The benzodiazepines suggest politely that the brain might want to consider calming down. The brain ignores the suggestion. More medication, higher doses, still seizing. Some people seized for 30 minutes, some longer. Long enough that muscles broke down. Long enough that proteins leaked into bloodstreams and kidneys started failing. Long enough that parts of their brains stopped working permanently. They'd wake up different, couldn't remember their names, couldn't walk without help. Speech slurred like someone had rearranged their mouth while they were sleeping. The $2 high had cost them pieces of their brain. The brain doesn't offer refunds. Weeks later, they'd be back on the same corner. Because where else would they go? The weight was still there. The concrete was still there. The drug was still there. The missing pieces of brain didn't make any of that go away. Another year passed. The system became complete. Not solved, not stopped, but complete. Every component functioning, every role assigned, every person knowing their position. The labs in China manufactured the compounds by the hundreds. Industrial facilities producing chemicals by the ton, changing formulas as soon as compounds got banned, shipping them internationally as research chemicals, legal export, customer service available in English. Very professional operation. The importers brought them into America labelled as incense or potpourri or air freshener. Legal import. Customs waved them through. They smelled terrible, but the paperwork was in order. The distributors sold them to stores as legal products. Business to business, nothing suspicious. The stores sold them to customers with "not for human consumption" printed clearly on every package. Legal sale. The warning did its job, which was legal protection rather than consumer safety. The customers smoked them, which was the only illegal step in the entire supply chain. The person at the very end, the one with no home, no money, no options, became the criminal. The customers froze on sidewalks where they became visible, filmable, content. The phones filmed them, creating shareable, viral engagement. The algorithm approved. The paramedics picked them up in what had become routine, documented, repeated calls, billable, technically, though nobody was paying. The hospitals treated them, stabilized them, released them, then saw them again 6 hours later. The revolving door spun efficiently. The cities passed more laws while the manufacturers changed more molecules. The laws failed again. The cycle continued. and the chemistry kept evolving. Because the compounds weren't done getting stranger. The effects weren't done getting worse. 3rd generation synthetics, 4th generation, each one less predictable than the last. Each one tested exclusively on humans who couldn't afford to be part of clinical trials. The frozen people on sidewalks, that was manageable. Visible but manageable. Tragic but contained. Filmable. The system could handle that. What came next wasn't going to be manageable. What came next was going to be weirder, more aggressive, harder to ignore. The chemistry was accelerating. The compounds were getting stranger, and the gap between technically legal and actively dangerous was about to become a canyon. But that admission was still years away. Governments are slow learners. For now, the packets kept appearing. The people kept freezing. The phones kept filming. The ambulances kept arriving. The hospitals kept treating. The cities kept meeting. The price stayed $2. The system worked. For everyone except the people it was supposedly designed to help. Which is how systems usually work if you pay attention. So the pattern was established. Homeless populations freezing on sidewalks. Paramedics picking up the same people twice a day. Cities passing laws that didn't work. Manufacturers changing molecules faster than legislation could type them. The system humming along beautifully for everyone except the people it was supposedly designed to help. You'd think that would be rock bottom. That we'd found the floor. Turns out there's a basement, and the basement has a basement. And synthetic cannabinoids were about to find every one of them. Because between 2017 and 2021, 3 things happened that transformed a manageable tragedy into something worse. The drug found a new captive market. The chemistry evolved in directions nobody predicted. And then a pandemic arrived to remind everyone that suffering doesn't have a maximum capacity. There's always room for more. Let's start with a place where America has historically failed to solve any drug problem whatsoever. Prison. Here's what happens when you design a punishment system so thorough that it tests bodily fluids, like you're screening for spies at a nuclear facility. America's prisons test constantly. Random urinalysis. Announced ones. Surprise ones. The kind that wake you at 3 a.m. because someone with a clipboard decided it was time to prove you're still sober, while serving time for a crime that might have involved drugs years ago. The American justice system, where your future depends on your ability to pee into a cup on command while a stranger watches. Democracy in action. The tests are expensive, wasteful, mostly theatre designed to show taxpayers their money is being spent on vigilant punishment. But they do accomplish one thing. They catch people who use normal drugs. Marijuana shows up for 30 days. Cocaine, 3 to 5 days. Heroin, 2 to 3. The tests were built for those chemicals, refined over decades, extremely effective. A technological marvel of human ingenuity dedicated to catching people who smoked a plant. Synthetic cannabinoids? Gone in hours, sometimes less. The tests couldn't see them, like trying to catch a ghost with a butterfly net. The chemicals moved too fast. By the time the urine hit the cup, the evidence had already left the building. This is the kind of information that travels through prison populations like wildfire through dry brush. Someone discovers you can get high on something that won't show up on tests. That information doesn't stay secret. It gets whispered in chow lines, passed in kites, shared in rec yards. The prison communication network is faster than most internet connections and far more reliable than your cell service. By 2016, spice was already moving through the system. By 2017, it was endemic. The math was simple. Someone on the outside could buy a packet for $2, soak it in water, or spray it with alcohol until the chemicals dissolved. Let paper absorb it. Regular paper, nothing special. Mail the paper to someone inside. Regular mail. looked like a letter from Grandma with a recipe for cookies written in careful handwriting. The guards check for contraband. They're looking for drugs that look like drugs. This looks like paper with ink on it. Inside, that paper was gold. Literally. Worth more by weight. An inmate would tear off a corner, 1/2 an inch by 1/2 an inch. Smoke it. The same consciousness deletion that worked on sidewalks worked just as well in cells. Maybe better. Because if you're trying to endure years in a concrete box designed to crush your spirit, temporary ego death isn't a side effect, it's the product. The profit margins made crack dealing look like charity work. On the streets, that $2 packet got you high once, maybe twice. In prison, that same packet, properly dissolved and distributed onto paper, could become 50 doses, 50 sales, 50 opportunities to trade for commissary, protection, phone time, whatever currency the economy was using that week. Drug dealers inside made fortunes, relative fortunes. We're still talking about an economy where top ramen is a unit of currency, but fortunes nonetheless. Guards got involved because corruption isn't optional when the profit margins look like this. Smugglers got creative. Drones started dropping packages in rec yards like Amazon trying a new delivery model. The corrections departments noticed something odd was happening. Inmates were collapsing. Not from stabbings or fights or the usual prison emergencies, just collapsing. Standing one moment, gone the next, frozen, eyes open. Nobody home. They'd call medical. Medical would arrive. Find someone catatonic. Vitals normal. No injuries. No drugs visible. Just a body whose consciousness had temporarily checked out. Then they'd run the drug test. Clean. Perfect. The chemicals were already gone. The test was looking for the past. The person was stuck in the present, frozen, waiting for their brain to remember how to operate a body. The corrections officials tried to fight it. New rules, enhanced searches, crackdowns on mail. They'd seize letters that looked suspicious, test them for chemicals, find nothing. Because the manufacturers had gotten creative. Some were using chemicals that didn't show up on tests. Some were using such small amounts that tests couldn't detect them. Some were using new compounds that nobody had bothered to ban yet because they'd been invented last Tuesday in a lab in Guangzhou by someone who'd never heard of the DEA and wouldn't care if they had. Pennsylvania tried a solution in 2018 that was either brilliant or dystopian, depending on your tolerance for technology solving problems it created. They started photocopying all inmate mail. The original letter would be stored. The inmate got a photocopy. No more chemicals on paper. Problem solved. Take that chemistry. Except people found workarounds immediately. Soaking the paper before sending it so the chemicals absorbed deep, enough that a scan would capture them. Using invisible ink that only appeared under certain conditions. Engineering solutions emerging from people with access to nothing but determination and Google. The creative spirit of humans trying to get high has solved more engineering problems than most university research departments. NASA should take notes. By 2019, the Bureau of Prisons was reporting synthetic cannabinoid incidents in most federal facilities. Not use, incidents, medical emergencies, people collapsing. The actual use was probably universal, because if you test everyone constantly and nobody fails, but everyone's getting high, the tests aren't testing for the right thing. Someone should probably look into that. The federal response was to ask manufacturers to reformulate drug tests to catch synthetic cannabinoids, which they did, eventually, for the compounds that existed when they developed the test. By the time the new test rolled out, the manufacturers had moved on to different chemicals. It's an arms race where one side has unlimited chemistry and the other side has government procurement timelines. Guess who's winning? Here's what nobody talks about. Synthetic cannabinoids didn't just stay the same drug with different names. They evolved, like Pokemon, except instead of getting cuter, They got significantly more likely to cause your brain to forget how to operate your lungs. The early synthetic cannabinoids, Huffman's compounds from the 1990s and early 2000s, were relatively well understood. Scientists had studied them, published papers. The effects were documented. They were stronger than THC, sure, but in predictable ways. If you gave someone the original formula, you could reasonably guess what would happen. They'd get very high, might seize, probably wouldn't die. By 2017, the chemistry had moved so far beyond Huffman's work that calling them synthetic cannabinoids was like calling a nuclear reactor spicy coal, technically in the same category, functionally completely different. Huffman had been trying to understand brains. These people were trying to avoid federal scheduling laws while maximizing profit margins. Different motivations produce different molecules. The manufacturers weren't chemists trying to create better research tools. They were chemists trying to create products that weren't illegal yet. The goal wasn't simulate marijuana effectively. The goal was avoid the ban list while still getting people high enough that they'll pay money. If the molecule causes unpredictable side effects, well, that's what the not for human consumption label is for. Legal department approved. Third-generation synthetics started appearing around 2017. These weren't subtle modifications. These were completely new structures, different binding mechanisms, different effects, same not for human consumption label, same cartoon mascots grinning at you from shiny packaging. Inside, a compound. Nobody had tested on anything more complex than a culture dish if they'd tested it at all. Sometimes they just synthesized it and sent it out to see what happened. The American public as unpaid beta testers for experimental chemistry. Innovation. The effects got weirder. People weren't just freezing anymore. They were freezing in more creative positions. Bent backward like they were trying to do yoga poses they hadn't learned. Arms at angles that suggested someone had paused them mid-gesture and forgotten to hit play. Human statues performing interpretive dance for an audience of pigeons and confused tourists. The episodes lasted longer. Early spice might delete your consciousness for 30 minutes. The new stuff, hours. People would go down in the morning and come back after dark, having missed an entire day of their life. Time theft. The drug had stolen time from them and left no receipt. Somewhere, there's a lost and found box for missing Tuesdays. The aggression started, showing up too. This was new. The new synthetic compounds made some people aggressive, not everyone, not predictably, but enough that EMTs started approaching frozen spice users with more caution, because there was a non-zero chance the person would suddenly wake up swinging, like a bear trap that looks like a statue. Surprise violence, courtesy of chemistry. Some of the new compounds caused seizures more frequently, not the gentle kind where you fall down and shake a bit. The violent kind where your body tries to tear itself apart from the inside. Grand mal seizures that lasted so long they started causing permanent brain damage. Muscle tissue breaking down, kidneys failing. The human body wasn't designed to seize for 45 minutes straight. But synthetic cannabinoids hadn't read the manual on what human bodies were designed for. The combinations got worse too. Different batches were getting mixed. Sometimes intentionally, dealers combining leftovers from multiple suppliers. Sometimes accidentally, cross-contamination in facilities that processed multiple compounds. Sometimes mysteriously. Nobody quite sure what was in this batch or where it came from, but it was cheap and in stock. Users would smoke something labelled Kesu that contained chemicals from 3 different generations of synthetic cannabinoids, plus fillers nobody could identify. The effect wasn't predictable, couldn't be. You weren't smoking a drug. You were smoking a chemistry experiment that nobody had designed and nobody had approved and nobody would claim responsibility for when it went wrong. Prisons started seeing mass incidents. Not one person collapsing, dozens, hundreds. Same batch making its way through a facility in hours. By the time anyone figured out what compound it was, that batch was gone, and 3 new ones had arrived. The chemistry moved faster than any testing could keep up with. Cities saw the same pattern. A bad batch would hit a homeless population and suddenly, emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Not the usual trickle of 1 or 2 cases. Waves. People arriving faster than beds became available. Hallways full. Parking lots converted to triage zones. Doctors sorting between who's seizing and needs immediate help versus who's just frozen and will probably wake up eventually. 3 people died, not from the spice itself, from the seizures. Their bodies convulsed so violently that they damaged themselves. Muscles tore, bones broke, organs failed. The human body treating itself as the enemy while strangers stood around filming on phones because this was content. And content was engagement, and engagement was all anyone understood anymore. The coroner's report listed synthetic cannabinoid toxicity as the cause of death, which was technically true but functionally useless. Which compound, from which manufacturer, contaminated with what? Nobody knew. The batch was gone. The dealer was gone. The bodies remained. This is where harm reduction people started losing their minds, not figuratively, literally. People whose entire careers involved helping drug users stay alive were confronting a problem that broke all their tools. Standard harm reduction works like this. Identify the drug, understand the effects, provide resources to reduce harm. It's a reasonable system. It assumes you know what you're dealing with. It assumes the drug has an identity. It assumes consistency. Synthetic cannabinoids said, cute assumption, and set everything on fire. You couldn't identify the drug, it changed weekly. You couldn't understand the effects. Each compound worked differently. Testing kits? Designed for known compounds. These compounds didn't exist when the kits were made. By the time you developed a new test, the chemistry had evolved 3 times and opened a franchise. Seattle tried safe consumption sites where users could smoke under medical supervision. Great idea. Except the medical supervision could watch someone collapse, but couldn't reverse it. There's no antidote. Medical professionals reduced to crossing their fingers. Very scientific. San Francisco handed out information sheets explaining the risks. The chemistry changed so fast that by the time you printed the warning, it was describing a compound nobody was selling anymore. It's like putting up beware of dog signs after the dog has evolved into a different species. Portland tried a mobile response unit, got overwhelmed immediately by the sheer volume of frozen people scattered across the city, like performance art installations nobody commissioned. The harm reduction community published papers with titles like Synthetic Cannabinoids, A Moving Target, and When Harm Reduction Strategies Fail. Academic language for we have no idea what to do and everything we have tried has failed. The papers documented the failure thoroughly. Charts, graphs, case studies, very scientific. 0 solutions, because you can't solve a problem that mutates faster than your ability to understand it. Then 2020 arrived, as if synthetic cannabinoids needed help making things worse. The pandemic hit homeless populations the way hurricanes hit beach houses, hard, fast, and with a complete disregard for whether you had insurance. Shelters closed or reduced capacity. Can't have hundreds of people packed in rooms during a respiratory pandemic. The people who'd been sleeping inside went outside. Cities responded with sweeps, scattering encampments. The logic was flawless. Can't have people gathering in groups, and so let's chase them around the city until they gather in different groups. Problem solved. Pat yourselves on the back, gentlemen. Then the stimulus checks arrived. That's $200 to every American. The government's way of saying we care while also saying please spend this so the economy doesn't collapse. For the homeless population, that created a brief moment of liquidity, an economic blip, a temporary condition of having money. Where did it go? Drugs. Immediately, directly. Do not pass go. Do not collect additional financial counselling. Not because homeless people are financially irresponsible. Because if you're homeless during a pandemic, spending $100-200 on rent isn't an option. There's no rent. There's just today. And today is unbearable. And the corner store is selling temporary exits from today for $2. The dealers saw a spike like Black Friday for consciousness deletion. Everyone had money simultaneously. Supply met demand. Capitalism at work. The invisible hand of the market reaching into pockets and pulling out stimulus checks. The isolation made everything worse. Shelters closed. Drop-in centres closed. Services stopped. The social infrastructure that kept people tethered to humanity dissolved like sugar in rain. What remained? Corners, tents, and chemistry. Spice use exploded. Cheaper than heroin. Stronger than marijuana. Available when everything else was locked down, while America debated mask mandates, synthetic cannabinoid sales went through the roof, or would have, if roofs were involved. Mostly it went through corners. Emergency department visits for synthetic cannabinoids tripled. At the same time, hospitals were overwhelmed with COVID patients. The emergency rooms became sorting facilities for different kinds of medical disasters. Triage for a nation that had decided some disasters were more important than others. And then, because apparently 2020 hadn't been creative enough with suffering, the dealers discovered a new business opportunity. The kind that looks brilliant on a whiteboard in a warehouse and catastrophic everywhere else. Synthetic cannabinoids were selling well. Fentanyl was selling well. Why not combine them? Synergy, cross-selling, vertical integration, all the buzzwords that business schools teach applied to killing people accidentally. From a dealer perspective, efficiency. 2 different customer bases buying. From the same corners, why not spray fentanyl onto the same herbs you're already spraying synthetic cannabinoids on? It's just good business. Maximize profits per square foot of corner. The invisible hand of the market now with bonus opioids. From a customer perspective, surprise death in a shiny packet. Someone buying spice expected synthetic cannabinoids. They'd built whatever tolerance existed. They knew the risks. Freezing, seizing, temporary ego death. Fine. Acceptable. Part of the deal. They were not expecting opioids. Were not prepared for opioids. Might not know opioids were involved until they stopped breathing, which makes it hard to complain about false advertising. The crossover deaths started appearing in late 2020. Medical examiners would find people dead with spice paraphernalia. The scene looked like a synthetic cannabinoid overdose. The toxicology came back, fentanyl. The dealer had expanded the product line without informing the customers. No warning labels, no ingredient lists. Just surprise opioids in your consciousness deletion herb blend. It's called innovation. Sometimes the mixing was intentional, marketed as enhanced or extra strength, premium pricing for premium death risk. Sometimes it was accidental, cross-contamination in facilities processing multiple drugs. Nobody cleaning equipment between batches because cleaning costs time and time costs money. Sometimes nobody knew how it happened. The supply chain was too opaque. Somewhere between a lab in China and a corner in Brooklyn, fentanyl got added to the mix. The details don't matter once you're dead. Narcan became essential for spice overdoses, which was new. You didn't used to need Narcan for synthetic cannabinoids. They're not opioids. But now you might be responding to what looked like a spice overdose that was actually fentanyl poisoning wearing a spice costume. Chemistry doing improv theatre. Very creative. Very deadly. The crisis that had been slowly burning through homeless populations was now moving faster. The chemistry had found a new way to kill people. The market had discovered a new efficiency. Progress. So that's where things stood at the end of 2021. Synthetic cannabinoids in prisons, invisible to drug tests, chemistry evolving faster than human comprehension, a pandemic that scattered the most vulnerable people into isolation, and fentanyl contamination that turned an already lethal lottery even more unpredictable. 4 disasters having a reunion tour. But this isn't just an American story. While America's busy achieving peak dysfunction with synthetic cannabinoids, other countries were dealing with the same chemistry, the same packets, the same manufacturers in China shipping the same cartoon mascot-branded consciousness deletion to every port that would accept it. Some countries watched what America did and thought, let's try something different. Some countries looked at the American approach and said absolutely not, and some countries just did what they always do, which turned out to work significantly better than whatever America was attempting. Funny how that works. The chemistry doesn't respect borders, but policy does, and the difference in outcomes is about to get uncomfortable. For America specifically, everyone else will be fine. Here's how the rest of the world handled synthetic cannabinoids. Spoiler, significantly better than America. Not perfectly, not without problems, just better. Which isn't a high bar when the comparison point is, let's ban molecules one at a time while manufacturers create new ones faster than we can type. Some countries looked at the American approach, the endless game of molecular whack-a-mole, the prisons full of people who'd smoked the wrong plant, the homeless populations frozen on sidewalks, and decided to try something radical. They asked, what if we didn't do that? Revolutionary thinking, groundbreaking, someone should write a paper. The fundamental problem with banning specific molecules is that molecules don't care about laws. They're not citizens. They don't have feelings. You can ban one specific formula all day long. The molecule doesn't feel rejected. It doesn't stop existing. And the chemist in Guangzhou just makes a slightly different version on Tuesday afternoon and ships it by Wednesday. It's like playing chess against someone who can invent new pieces mid-game. That's not a legal move. It is now. I just made up this piece. It's called a knight bishop. It moves in an L shape and diagonally checkmate. You can protest all you want. You're still checkmated. Some countries realized this and tried a different approach. Ban the entire category. Not specific molecules. The whole concept. Anything that acts like a synthetic cannabinoid is illegal, regardless of what its specific molecular structure looks like. It's called blanket legislation, or analog laws. The legal equivalent of saying, I know what you're doing, stop it. All of it. I don't care how you rearrange the atoms. Did it work? Better than the American approach, which is like saying, this fire extinguisher works better than this bucket of gasoline. Technically true, still not great. Because here's the thing about blanket bans, they're vague, intentionally vague. Which is the point. You want to catch everything. But vague laws make prosecutors nervous and defense attorneys wealthy. Does my client's molecule fit your definition? Depends on how you define substantially similar. Let's spend 6 months in court finding out. The legal system grinding away at the speed of continental drift, while the chemistry keeps evolving at the speed of thought. But at least it slowed things down. At least manufacturers couldn't just change one atom and call it legal. They had to think. They had to innovate. They had to actually try to evade the law rather than just technically complying with it. Progress. Other countries tried an even wilder approach. Make the problem less appealing. Reduce demand. Crazy talk. Revolutionary. What if people didn't want to buy consciousness deletion in shiny packets because they had other options? Some countries treated addiction like a health problem instead of a crime. Imagine that. Treating a medical condition with medicine instead of prison. Someone alert the Nobel Committee, we've achieved the impossible. They offered treatment, actual treatment, not wait 6 months for a bed and then get kicked out after 28 days whether you're ready or not. Real, accessible, long-term treatment. Turns out when you give people options besides freeze on a corner or go to prison, some of them take the third option. They provided housing. Radical concept. It's hard to get clean when you're sleeping under an overpass. It's hard to make good decisions when you're worried about where you'll sleep tonight. It's hard to think about your future when your present is unbearable. Housing first programs. Give people housing first, then address the addiction. Because it's easier to quit drugs when you have a roof over your head than when you're on the street trying to figure out where to pee without getting arrested. Did it solve everything? No! Did it reduce the number of people smoking? Random chemistry sprayed on lawn clippings? Yes. Turns out, give people basic human necessities is an effective harm reduction strategy. Who knew? Well, everyone who's ever thought about it for 5 minutes. But policy isn't made by people who think about things. Meanwhile, back in America, the approach remained consistent. Ban it harder. Over the years, the federal government kept adding synthetic cannabinoids to the banned substances list. One by one, each one individually, each one requiring its own legislative process, each one obsolete by the time the ban took effect. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of bailing water out of a sinking boat with a spoon while someone's cutting holes in the bottom. You're working very hard, you're very busy, you're accomplishing nothing. But the motion creates the appearance of effort, and appearance is what matters when budgets are allocated. The DEA kept raiding stores, seizing packets, holding press conferences with tables covered in colourful packaging. Very photogenic, very satisfying, zero impact on availability. The stores that got shut down reopened under new names within weeks. The packets that got seized were replaced by shipments that arrived the next day. Supply and demand. Economics. 101. If demand exists, supply will appear. You can't arrest your way out of a market, but you can create jobs for law enforcement and prosecutors and prison guards. You can fill beds. You can generate statistics. You can point at numbers and say, look, we're trying. The numbers don't have to mean anything, they just have to exist. In recent years, synthetic cannabinoids achieved a curious status in America. Concentrated, but invisible, no longer everywhere. The general population had moved on. High school use dropped significantly. Casual users found other drugs. The packets disappeared from some neighbourhoods entirely. The crisis that had seemed universal at its peak had contracted, but it hadn't ended. It had concentrated, found its market, settled into the populations that needed it most, people who had to pass drug tests, people who needed the cheapest high available, people for whom $1 or $2 was the difference between consciousness and oblivion. The homeless population kept using. The prisons kept seeing outbreaks. The emergency rooms kept treating frozen people, but fewer of them, less visible. The videos stopped circulating. The news coverage moved on. COVID dominated everything. Then inflation. Then whatever political crisis occupied the news cycle. Synthetic cannabinoids became what they are now, a permanent feature of certain landscapes, not a national crisis, a localized ongoing disaster affecting populations nobody's watching anymore. The kind of problem that's only a problem for the people experiencing it. The paramedics kept responding. The system kept functioning exactly as it had been functioning, which is to say, badly, but consistently. Consistency is its own kind of success. If things are terrible in predictable ways, you can plan around the terribleness. You can allocate resources. You can staff appropriately. You can build terribleness into the budget. American healthcare had finally achieved efficiency in managing disaster, just not in preventing it. Here's where we are now. Synthetic cannabinoids are still here. Not everywhere like they were at the peak. The crisis has faded from public consciousness. Emergency room visits dropped. Poison control calls decreased. Drug seizures declined. High school use fell significantly. The epidemic that dominated headlines years ago became background noise. But here's the thing about crises fading from view. Sometimes they don't actually end. They just become invisible. The synthetic cannabinoid problem didn't solve itself. It concentrated. The general population moved on to other drugs, other crises, other concerns. But the populations who'd been using it the most, homeless, incarcerated, economically desperate, kept using. Because the reasons they started using haven't changed. The packets are still sold at corner stores. Still cheap, $1, sometimes $2. Still available with the same cartoon mascots on shiny packaging. The chemistry is still evolving. Still on its 6th or 7th generation of compounds, depending on how you count. Nobody's counting very carefully. The compounds being sold now bear little resemblance to Huffman's original research. They're synthetic cannabinoids in the way that Frankenstein's monster is technically a person. Same category, wildly different execution. The effects haven't gotten safer. Some batches are more dangerous than the early generations, some are less. It's random. Quality control remains non-existent. Every packet is a gamble with chemistry that's been proven deadly. The fentanyl contamination continues. Some cities are seeing increases in synthetic cannabinoid deaths recently. The crossover between synthetic cannabinoids and opioids has become routine. Paramedics still carry Narcan for everything. The packets might contain what they claim, might not. The lottery continues. Prisons still can't test for it. The compounds keep evolving, staying ahead of detection. The use is still universal among incarcerated populations who want to get high without detection. The system has learned to live with it. Stable dysfunction. The homeless population using synthetic cannabinoids hasn't shrunk. If anything, it's grown. Not because synthetic cannabinoids got more popular, they got less popular overall, but because the homeless population itself has grown. Housing got more expensive, wages didn't. The math stopped working for more people. They fell through the cracks, landed on streets, found themselves in the same situation as everyone who'd fallen before them. Existing is unbearable. Unconsciousness costs $1 or $2, and the alternative is suffering. Through every second of homelessness while fully aware, the cheap exit is still available, still works, still deletes consciousness temporarily, still comes with risks, freezing, seizing, dying, permanent brain damage, surprise opioids, still worth it to people who have no other exit. The calculation hasn't changed. The support systems haven't improved. Shelters are still full. Treatment programs still have waiting lists. Housing assistance still requires paperwork that's impossible to complete when you don't have an address. The social safety net still has holes large enough to drive buses through. People keep falling through, landing in the same place, finding the same solution. Some cities have gotten better at managing the visibility. Sweeps are more regular. Encampments get cleared faster. The frozen people get moved before they accumulate in numbers large enough to generate videos. It's not solving the problem. It's managing the optics. Different goal, easier to achieve. The crisis hasn't ended. It just learned to hide. Out of sight, out of mind. An ancient strategy. Works perfectly as long as you're not the one being put out of sight. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. This is working as designed, not the synthetic cannabinoids themselves. Those are chaos, uncontrolled chemistry causing unpredictable damage. Nobody designed that. But the system that makes synthetic cannabinoids necessary, that's working exactly as intended. A society that produces homelessness at scale needs something to make homelessness bearable. Otherwise, people might start asking uncomfortable questions about why homelessness exists in the richest country in human history. A prison system that incarcerates millions needs something to make incarceration survivable. Otherwise, people might start asking uncomfortable questions about why we cage more humans per capita than any nation on Earth. An economy that demands poverty to function needs something to make poverty tolerable. Otherwise, people might start organizing, might start demanding change, might start asking why the system is designed this way. Synthetic cannabinoids are a pressure valve. They release the tension that would otherwise build towards something more disruptive. They keep people sedated, manageable, contained. They turn rage into apathy. They transform "this is unacceptable" into "I just need to make it through today." This isn't a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a boardroom and planned this. It's emergence. A system optimizing for stability found a solution. The solution is chemical pacification of populations that might otherwise destabilize things. Nobody designed it. It just happened. Piece by piece, decision by decision, each choice reasonable in isolation. The sum total, a mechanism for managing human suffering through pharmacological deletion of consciousness. It works. It's efficient. It's cheap. $2 per dose. The market has solved the problem of how to make poverty bearable. The product is available everywhere. Distribution is handled by entrepreneurs working in a competitive marketplace. Supply meets demand, capitalism at its finest. The cost is measured in frozen bodies, burnt-out brains, and people who've forgotten what hope feels like. But those costs are externalized, borne by people who don't vote, don't lobby, don't matter to the functioning of the system. Free market principles, the invisible hand of the market showing exactly what it values. John Huffman spent his later years frustrated, angry even, which wasn't his default state. He'd made compounds to help researchers understand brains. They'd been weaponized into street drugs that destroyed brains. His name had become shorthand for consciousness deletion. His legacy was freezing people on corners. He said in interviews that he felt terrible about it, that he wished he'd never published the formulas, that if he'd known what would happen, he would have kept the research private. This is the wrong lesson. The problem wasn't the research. The problem was never the research. You can't ban knowledge. You can't unpublish chemistry. Once molecules are discovered, they exist. Humans will find them eventually. That's what humans do. We discover things, then we figure out how to use them. Then we're surprised when the uses include self-harm. The problem was the world that turned research into street drugs. The problem was a society that needed cheap consciousness deletion so badly that it created a market for mystery chemicals sprayed on lawn clippings. Huffman didn't create that need. He just happened to publish formulas that filled it. If it hadn't been synthetic cannabinoids, it would have been something else, has been something else, will be something else: crack, meth, fentanyl, kratom, bath salts. Whatever chemistry can be manufactured cheaply and sold to people desperate enough to take the risk. The drugs are symptoms. The disease is a society that produces suffering faster than it produces solutions, that generates homelessness like a factory produces widgets, that treats poverty as a personal failing instead of a structural feature, that offers prison or death as the primary interventions for addiction. You can ban every molecule in existence. Won't matter. New ones will appear. The demand will find supply. The market works. It always works. That's what markets do. So here's where the story actually ends. Not with synthetic cannabinoids being solved. They're not solved, won't be solved, can't be solved by banning chemistry. The chemistry is infinite. You're banning water molecules in the ocean. Good luck, bring a big net. Not with homelessness being solved. It's not being solved. It's being managed, contained, made less visible, The system is optimized for managing homelessness, not ending it. Ending it would require changes to how housing works, how wages work, how healthcare works, how addiction treatment works. Too expensive, too complicated, too disruptive to too many profitable arrangements. Not with prisons being solved, they're full. They're staying full. The system needs them full. Empty prisons are expensive and create unemployment for guards and prosecutors and everyone whose livelihood depends on incarceration. Can't have that. Better to keep the cells occupied. The story ends with synthetic cannabinoids becoming permanent. Background noise. Just another thing that happens to invisible people. Another product in the market. Another solution to the problem of existence being unbearable for the people society has decided don't matter. The packets will keep getting sold. The people will keep freezing. The paramedics will keep responding. The emergency rooms will keep treating. The prisons will keep filling. The bodies will keep appearing in alleys and doorways and tent encampments. And everyone will keep pretending this is somehow surprising. That's the cosmic joke at the centre of all of this. We act shocked. We film videos. We share them online with horrified reactions. We write articles. We hold meetings. We pass laws. We allocate budgets. We do everything except address why people need to delete their consciousness in the first place. Because addressing that would require admitting that the system produces these outcomes systematically. That homelessness isn't a bug. That poverty isn't an accident. That suffering isn't a random occurrence but a structural feature of how we've organised society. And if we admitted that, we might have to change it, which would be expensive and difficult and would inconvenience people who are currently comfortable. Can't have that. Better to keep banning molecules, better to keep arresting dealers, better to keep pretending the problem is the drugs and not the world that demands them. Synthetic cannabinoids are a mirror. They show us exactly what we value and what we don't. They show us who matters and who doesn't. They show us the logical endpoint of a system that treats human suffering as acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of other goals. We criminalized a plant, created a market for fake versions that are actually dangerous, then banned those, watched them evolve faster than we could respond, and threw up our hands and called it unsolvable. Nobody designed this outcome, but we built it, one decision at a time, each piece reasonable in isolation, the whole thing absurd. These synthetic versions exist because we needed them to exist. Not Huffman, not the Chinese manufacturers, not the dealers, us, collectively, systemically. Through thousands of small decisions and hundreds of policies and decades of pretending poverty is a personal failure instead of a policy choice. Synthetic cannabinoids will keep existing because they serve a function. They solve a problem, not for the people using them, for the people who benefit from users being sedated instead of organised. That's the story. Not a cautionary tale about drugs. A mirror held up to show us what we're actually doing when we look away from suffering and call it inevitable. The packets will still be there tomorrow, not everywhere, not in every neighbourhood, but at certain corner stores, in certain areas, on certain corners, with their cartoon mascots and their warning labels and their promise of temporary oblivion for the price of a coffee. And people will keep buying them. Not everyone. Not the general population. But the people for whom $1 or $2 for a few hours of not existing is still the best option available. Not because they're stupid, not because they're weak, not because they don't know better, because sometimes unconsciousness is cheaper than consciousness, and a society that makes that calculation true for enough people shouldn't be surprised when those people take the deal. And that should terrify us more than any chemical ever could.